Well, who exactly owns philosophy? I know this is a crazy question, but let's give it a critical look. Well, when we hear the word philosophy, the first thing that often comes to our mind is ancient Greece. We quickly think of famous figures like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Because of this, philosophy is commonly seen as a Western invention, and as a result, other philosophical traditions are often pushed aside. They're mostly treated as mere cultural curiosities or forced to pass through Western standard before they are accepted as real philosophy. But does that mean the West own philosophy? The answer to that question is no. No. What the West did first, if we have to give them credit, was to systematize, articulate philosophy, but they never invented it. Philosophy has always existed. In fact, Indian and Egyptian philosophy predates Greek philosophy. The ancient Greek only made philosophy to learn on how to look at itself. Greeks were the first people to question what it even meant to think. Now, Greek philosopher Plato, in his book, The Republic, gives a distinction between what he called doxa, an opinion, and sophia, the wisdom. And this is often treated as the foundational moment in philosophy's self definition. Today, we don't just ask what we can know, but what it even means to know as philosophers. I think it is imperative to note that philosophy is perhaps the only discipline in the world that self-diagnoses and is able to correct itself. And this self-examination is often praised as philosophy's greatest strength. But it also created this, this powerful narrative that philosophy truly begins in Greece and belongs to the West. And the paradox here is that that very habit of self-criticism that philosophy celebrates is exactly what we can use to question about the ownership. It's what makes claims of ownership deeply questionable. Now, to philosophize in Plato's sense, if you go back to Plato, I think to philosophize in Plato's sense is to refuse, the finality of appearances and to subject, the claims to rational examination. Nothing in this gesture, confined it to Athens, let alone, the West as the civilizational bloc. So the moment we start asking for reasons, the idea of exclusive ownership, begins to fall apart. That is because reasons are meant to be questioned. They are meant to be challenged. They are meant to be revised. They invite the conversation. They invite the disagreement, and they invite the new ways of thinking. You can remember, as Western philosophy developed, it became even more obsessed with with questioning itself. Kant, for example, Immanuel Kant, for example, began to question the limits of human thinking. People like Hegel even argued that philosophy is reason that slowly grows through history. And Heidegger insisted that philosophy must always return to its beginning and question where it came from in the first place. But while Western philosophy was busy defining and redefining itself, it often assumed that this deep self questioning belonged only to the West. Other traditions, like especially African, were pushed aside, labeled as myth or simply worldview. And in most cases, you'll find that they were mostly studied as anthropological curiosities. So once you look closely, that assumption simply does not hold. Reason being, and let me limit this to an African frame, the claim that philosophy is Western formation is more of a historical writing, historical canon. It is not a philosophical argument. And this has been captured by several African philosophers. I'll start with one. It's a Benin philosopher, Pauline Hontonji, a 20th century African philosopher from Benin. He wrote a book which he titled African Philosophy, Myth and Reality. And he argues in this book that non-Western ways of thinking are often pushed out of philosophy because the rules of what counts as philosophy are set by Europe itself. So philosophy is defined in narrow ways. They require you that it has to be a written text. it has to be formal logic, or it has to have a European style of argument. And these rules are later treated as if they apply to all cultures everywhere. Then comes another philosopher, Congolese philosopher V.Y. Mudimbe, which in one of his notable books called The Invention of Africa, he shows how colonial system of knowledge portrayed Africa as existing outside reason. And this portrayal made it easier, to dismiss African thought as unphilosophical. But if you look closely, what appears to be this neutral definition of philosophy is in fact tied to power. I just call it power. The colonial power at the time. The power to decide what counts as philosophy and who is allowed to speak as philosopher. And since philosophy as an activity is constantly concerned with questioning its own nature, there is no single tradition that can claim final authority over its definition. That's crazy. It's just crazy, honestly. To do so would actually betrays the philosophy's most fundamental impulse, which I think is to subject every thinking to questioning. Philosophy should therefore, in my view, be understood as a mode of critical reflection, not a cultural artifact that is owned by one civilization. This is precisely what gives philosophy its that plural character. We have Ghanaian philosopher, which I think I have to mention here, Kwasi Wiredu. Those who have read him is one of the notable figures and one of the architects of the modern African philosophy. Kwasi Wiredu wrote a very insightful book, which he titled Philosophy and Another Book. It develops an idea he called conceptual decolonization. This, what Wiredu does, he does not call for actually the replacement of Western philosophy with an African philosophy. Instead, he argues that all philosophical concepts, including the Western ones, must be subjected to critical examination from multiple linguistic and cultural standpoints. So, if we treat philosophical ideas as unquestionable, they will stop being philosophy. I think they will be now ideologies or something else. So, it is this reason that philosophy can't be claimed to be owned by one. Because it needs continuous scrutiny. And the continuous scrutiny of philosophical ideas is what I feel is its ethical responsibility. Because scrutiny is the price of seriousness, and it is also the condition for genuine dialogue. So I can say the West discovered this scrutiny, but they did not own the subject for which such scrutiny was discovered. So we can say no one owns philosophy. Thank you.